They're doing some talking about a state budget at the Capitol, and there's a fight for the leadership of the Illinois Republican Party. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. Legislators have been at the Capitol this week. We are getting close, just a few weeks away from what is supposed to be the end of the spring legislative session. We'll see how that goes. And of course, it's an election year, and that colors lots of things. With me today, Hannah Meisel is back. She is now a freelance writer at the State House. Welcome, Hannah.
Glad to be here.
And Dave Dahl of WTAX Radio, who asks interesting questions of politicians from time to time.
Thank you. It's a gift.
Speaking of interesting questions, will we get a state budget this year? Let's see. While the Governor Rauner and the four leaders of the Democratic and Republican caucuses had gone about a year until a little bit ago, in between meetings or with all five of them in the room, there have been a couple now in the last few weeks. There was one this week. Governor came out and said the Democrats haven't agreed to a revenue estimate, whereas President Cullerton of the Senate said, if we have a pretty good idea, we can all kind of agree. And then, so there's a little bit of a difference of opinion there. And then the next day, in a committee hearing, Andy Manar, one of the state senators, the chairman of an appropriations committee, was saying, Rauner administration, haven't you given us legislation to implement the things that the governor asked for in his budget this year, like shifting pension money to schools? So you have a couple of examples there of a little conflict. We only have about 3 weeks till the end of the fiscal year. Dave, are we going to get a budget on time by May 31st?
Well, it's a fool's errand to try to predict things, but I will say this, there are an awful lot of lame ducks getting ready to waddle out of the legislature, and I think the impetus is going to declare victory and get out and let somebody else deal with all the mess. I think they will pass a budget, if not by May 31st, at least before July 1st. And
of course, the new fiscal year starts July 1st. Hannah, any thoughts on this from the people you're talking to?
Yeah, no, I feel like Dave is correct. People don't want a summer like we had last summer when we were in session, like almost every single day of July and part of August.
Well, sometimes it goes on. Yeah,
it was quite a long summer, let me tell you. And so, I wouldn't be surprised if we went past May 31st. But yeah, I feel like they're going to strike up some kind of deal, and then, of course, as they're wont to do, leave it till after the election. Yeah.
Now, do we think that if the Democrats still control the legislature, both houses, even though there's not a supermajority in the House anymore, they had to pass a budget, the governor vetoed it, and then they overrode it. Do we think that's going to happen again, or do we think the governor will agree to something that the Democrats actually pass? Because some of the things the governor wants include like a cost shift, have hundreds of millions of dollars at least passed on to local school districts to pick up their pension costs, whereas there's kind of a bipartisan bunch of legislators that say that's not going to happen, and you have school administrators, including Jennifer Gill, the superintendent of District 186 in Springfield, who testified this last week. That would cost us some millions of dollars over the years, and that, and Andy Manar, who helped pass school reform, a new formula last year, which is supposed to help schools have more equitable funding, said you will undo the good that you've done with that money by asking schools to pay this other money. So how can we get this done if the governor doesn't get the things in it that he wants? I guess I just raised that issue because we did go under this governor with the leadership in the legislature the same as it is now. 2 of the 3 full years that the governor has been in office went without a budget at all, other than stopgap funding.
The governor's been the governor for 3 years, and we've seen his greatest hits. What does he really want? What do you think he wants? Do you think he wants a budget? Do you think he wants to sign a budget with all the stuff in it that he said he wanted and stuff that the legislature is going to agree to?
Well,
I feel like he has, as Dave just said, kind of played his role well when, he gets to blame Madigan, he gets to blame, the Democratic machine and bring that up. And, that's one of his only things that he has left to stand on. Now that a lot of people on both sides, he broke trust with Democrats a long time ago. And then within the last year and a half, the governor has really upset people within his own party. Right. And so, I mean, the Blame Mike Madigan card is one of his greatest hits. And does he want a budget? I mean, I don't pretend to know his heart, but it's worked. I mean, it's not worked, but it's like when you're pushing a car along and, it's getting you somewhere, even if it's making terrible noises.
Yeah. Well,
he says this revenue estimate, just to let it sink into your mind and let it take root. Well, the Democrats don't want to do a revenue estimate, so we can't even do it. Meanwhile, he needs a little more than $1 billion to keep the prison system going. There was a story just now that a murder trial or something in Peoria couldn't take place because the state couldn't buy gas to move the prisoner, the defendant from somewhere in Fort Gatonia up to Peoria. And so what Cullerton said, we don't really need a revenue estimate because the COGFA estimate and the governor's office estimate are close anyway, and neither one are going to be enough for what we need to spend.
There's just have to get an agreement. Yeah.
There's nothing that stopped them from talking. And another thing that I find quite interesting is the governor is kind of throwing shade upon COGFA.
And COGFA is the
Commission on Government Forecasting Accountability,
which is the legislative. It's a legislative agency that does revenue forecasting and creates estimates of how much money will be coming in from taxes.
Something else, and I forget what that was.
Yes, the Economic and Fiscal Commission.
Well, nevertheless, why the governor is calling into question the credibility of COGFA, only he knows. But you've got their estimate, you've got the governor's office estimate. They're quite close. You've got an idea how much revenue is coming in, and you've got an idea of what you need to spend it on. And some of these things like the pension shift or pension savings, it sounds, I don't think anyone wants to do it.
Yeah.
And it's going to be highly complicated to put together in what ordinarily would be a pretty good chunk of time, 3 weeks.
Right.
A lot could get done in 3 weeks, but probably not that.
Yeah, and the governor's budget is built on the revenue that comes from the tax increase that was passed last year by Democrats over his veto, and then he rails on the campaign trail against that tax increase and says he wants to roll it back. It went up for individuals from 3.75% to 4.95%, but even his budget plan only would cut it back, 0.25, a quarter of a percentage point to 4.7% in a year, and that's only if they pass pension reform. We haven't even seen anything in the legislature about this, and it gets through the court and is approved, and he then says we could save that money and $1 billion, but it all looks like pie in the sky at this point.
The rollback.
Go ahead.
The rollback is going to come after businesses come here and after jobs grow and after income grows. How long does that take? I mean, if you plant a sapling, you've got to wait for that to grow.
Well, it's been an ongoing discussion for 3 years, and it seems to be continuing. I should mention that there's a group in Chicago called the Civic Federation. They do their own kind of analyses of budgets. They have said some of Rauner's budgets in the past, I think, were not balanced. They said this one is precariously balanced, partly because it depends on things like a shift in the pension money to local school districts, which the state now pays, and the sale of the James R. Thompson Center, big giant state building in Chicago, which may not come to fruition. Again, if any of this big stuff happens with big dollar input, certainly some things can happen near the end of a legislative session that comes quickly and gets done, but we certainly haven't seen any strong evidence that any of this is close.
I would add the Thompson Center is not big because what is the state going to reap off that $200 or $300 million? And they're going to relocate people elsewhere. That would cut into the savings there.
Right.
And the budget is going to be $38 billion with a B.
Yeah, and the city of Chicago has had trouble with the idea of selling the Thompson Center, partly because there's
it's on top of a CTA.
That's right. There's a subway underneath, and it's a giant transit hub. So, interesting times. Let us move on to an old issue that's new again. The Equal Rights Amendment has come up at the State House. It was an emotional issue, 36 years ago in 1982 when it was my first year full-time in Springfield. And it was crazy at the State House every day with Phyllis Schlafly and women dressed in red saying, "Stop ERA, it's going to change the role of women in society as we know it." And women dressed in green saying, "Let's go for ERA for equal rights and equal pay," and all of that. There was, Dave, as you know, there was a rally this week. It was a few hundred people. J.B. Pritzker, Democratic candidate for governor, and Juliana Stratton, his running mate, were there saying we're for ERA. The governor asked about this week, said, I'm for equal rights for everyone, but he didn't go farther. Erica Harold, who is the Attorney General candidate for the Republicans, was in Springfield on a different day and said she doesn't want to take a position on it, even though she thinks the law may have evolved over the years. But if she becomes Attorney General, she might have to interpret how this federal thing would happen. But Kwame Raoul, the Democratic candidate for Attorney General, he's a state senator from Chicago. He was at the rally. He's for it, and he voted when the Senate passed the ERA. Then it's in the House now, but there are people saying it's now an abortion issue. It would kind of create abortion on demand everywhere. Pro-ERA folks in Illinois say that won't happen, but you have the same kind of fears of social change that were prevalent 36 years ago, and they may not be able to get the votes in the House. Hannah, how's it looking?
I mean, it's, like you said, really interesting that everything old is new again.
No, this
and
one
even
sure
though
is.
the world is so different than it was, in 1979 when they had the original deadline to ratify.
How would
the
you
ERA.
know?
She can read.
I can read. And then 1982 when they had the extended
extension,
deadline.
right.
The world's a different place, but the same old, fears are going to be stoked by both sides.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating, like Phyllis Schlafly's daughter, being on hand.
Phyllis is on to the great beyond, but her daughter, I guess, was at the Capitol doing some interviews.
J.B. Pritzker, he brought in semi-rock star Lizzie Jagger, Mick Jagger's eldest daughter, to speak at that rally. It's also interesting that I think it was Wednesday this week, some Republicans held a short press conference and tried to urge the governor to get on board to pass it through the House.
Yeah, Representative Steve Anderson, who's from Geneva, Illinois, who's one of those who had actually also voted for the tax increase over the governor's objection and now isn't running for re-election. I heard him say at the rally, a lot of my Republican colleagues want to vote for this but are fearful electorally. They need to know from the governor, they need to know from their constituents that this is a good thing. Again, not everybody thinks so there you are.
It's also interesting. So it would make Illinois the 37th state to ratify the ERA. You need 38. But also it would be up to courts to, interpret, like, does it even matter anymore? Is it just symbolic?
Right.
Because, like we mentioned, the 1982 re-upping of the deadline passed many, many moons ago.
Right, and so the people who are trying to pass the ERA now, they're going on like the Me Too movement. They're taking the new energy in this. They're trying to get it passed after all this time. And it's under the theory that courts would say, yes, the deadline wasn't real. But that, as you say, has yet to be determined. So we shall see. I should also mention on another topic, the governor was in Chicago early in the week and announced a $2 billion mental health waiver pilot program called Better Care Illinois for behavioral health. It's like 10 programs. They're getting federal help to better take care of mental health, which is a big issue. And Dave, it sounds like that's just something that, I know there were Democratic and Republican legislators with him, so people were getting along on something. It seems like a good program is happening.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where you look, 17 different ways for the flaws in it, and you can't find any. I think it's a win for the governor.
It definitely was some good news for the governor, which is sorely needed right now for him. But, you also have to question, how is this program going to be managed? The governor, the administration in general is facing a lot of questions about how their Medicaid program and how their health care programs in general have been run in the last 3 years. So I think there's some concerns there. But yes, overall, I mean, it's...
Yeah. Well, one of those things, as you mentioned, Hannah, that there's been a major shift to managed care in Medicaid, where there was a shift in what companies are overseeing Medicaid patients and a new computer system. Some Democrats have complained, and other people, of it's been difficult for people to stay on the system or get on the system if they're supposed to be getting care for themselves or their children or their disabled kids. And yet, the state is working with a new computer system and consultant to get that done. There have been questions. Smaller pharmacies are saying that they're under managed care. Their reimbursement rates have gone way down, and some of them might have to go out of business. The governor said while he was at an event for Small Business Day in Springfield that, taxpayer value is what we're after and good health for people, and if you can compete, good, and if you can't, that just happens. But there's legislation that is being promoted in the legislature which would keep small pharmacy reimbursements at the level they're at, and that's been opposed by some of the bigger drug pharmacy companies. So a lot of the governor is claiming health care savings, but it does come at a cost to those who are not being paid as much as they were before. So we will see where that goes. I think that's a continuing complicated issue, but it does touch particularly the small town pharmacies have been complaining, and we'll see if that legislation moves through to the governor, and if he would approve it if they can reach some agreement, because they are at least in one committee hearing, the Rauner administration was opposed to that, saying, fixed costs for things that could be cost less. That's not what taxpayers are seeking. So we'll see where it goes. Speaking of health, the Quincy Veterans Home was in the news again, Dave. WBEZ, our public radio partner in Chicago. I don't know if they're our partner, but we know Dave McKinney is one of the reporters on that, who used to work in Springfield for the Sun-Times. But the governor has said that in the 3-year on and off outbreak of Legionnaire's disease at Quincy, that the state pretty much did everything they were supposed to do, followed federal guidelines quickly, alerted people. But WBEZ has come up with, which is the station that broke the story that 11 people or families were suing the state because of the deaths of the 13 people at the Quincy Veterans Home from Legionnaire's disease. They found that the governor's own Department of Labor had criticized the Veterans Affairs Department for not alerting their own employees to the Legionnaire's outbreak when it was happening. So we'll see where that goes, but who wants to talk about that?
Well, so BEZ unearthed that there were 8 workers who were infected at the at the Veterans Home. The Department of Labor, some of the workers said that they found out through social media posts or, through news reports about the Legionnaire's disease, which, again, for viewers, it's a type of pneumonia that's spread through water droplets.
Right, and it can be fatal, but it can also be treated if caught early with antibiotics.
Right.
Well, and if you're compromised or what have you, I mean, it's a lot more serious.
Yeah, and of course you got folks who are staying at the Quincy Veterans Home are going to be
They're
generally elderly and generally
right.
in easy to understand some failing health.
So the Department of Labor, they apparently reprimanded the Veterans Affairs Department, and they were going to formally cite them, but now BEZ unearthed they don't know what happened to the potential citation. It seemed to have disappeared. And it would have also been the Rauner administration essentially investigating the Rauner administration, because it's both his agencies.
Sure. Yeah, and of course this is a campaign issue. I mean, when J.B. Pritzker talks about Quincy, and you can say if it's good or bad, what everybody calls it, his fatal mismanagement because people died. And it's tough stuff. On the other hand, when children under the watchful eye or non-watchful eye of Department of Children and Family Services died under Pat Quinn, Bruce Rauner, as a candidate, was quick to say that was Quinn's fault.
I would point out that this latest Quincy information is on top of the email of, maybe we can tie this to Duckworth.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, and that was from Darlene Sanger, who was a former legislator who became a top aide to the governor, who is now the Republican candidate for state comptroller, and Susana Mendoza, the Democratic comptroller who's running against her, had a press conference in Chicago after that email was revealed, also by WBEZ. She was joined by J.B. Pritzker, and they, demanded an apology, which I don't think we've exactly heard, because, Darlene Sanger was basically saying, well, maybe this was happening years ago when Tammy Duckworth was in charge of the Veterans Affairs Department, but there was no Legionnaires known then, but they weren't testing for it, and there were cases of pneumonia. But Tammy Duckworth, who of course lost her legs when her helicopter was shot down in combat, left the department in 2009.
She was veterans director under Blago and then went to the feds after Obama got elected.
Right.
So she hadn't been in charge of Veterans Affairs for many years. So
and the first Legionnaires case that among these fatal ones, I think, happened in 2015. So it was 6 years after she was out, 5 or 6 years.
But more bad publicity for the administration on this last week, and now even more now, where it looks like they're trying to blame others. It looks like they're trying to hide the news. And
We must remember that Governor Rauner during the campaign often said, "I'll take the arrows," which is interesting. He said that a lot during the campaign of 2014.
He did.
On the other hand, he has blamed Mike Madigan and other people for a lot of things.
Haven't heard that in a while from the governor.
Well, we should also mention that VA Director Erica Jeffries said she was going to step down, and her last official day will be next Friday, May 18th.
Right, that's right. And she's going into the private sector as far as we know. I think it's Johnson & Johnson. Well, good luck to her. We'll see what happens next and what happens. At the outset of the show, I discussed a fight within the Republican Party of Illinois. So the situation is, and I think the governor even referred to him as the guy he put in as chairman of the party 4 years ago, Tim Schneider, who is on the DuPage County board, and he is the GOP chairman, and he is running for another term. And it's coming up on the 19th, which is a Saturday in next weekend, in Springfield when the state Republican Party meets. But Rauner's Jeannie Ives, the state representative who got 48.5% in the primary against Rauner and is clearly on the conservative side of things, certainly socially, and where she really disagrees with the governor on some things like the abortion issue. She wants Lake County GOP Chairman Mark Shaw. There's another guy, that Jeannie Ives, and a lawmaker from the suburbs from the Barrington area, David McSweeney, came out for Mark Shaw, who is on the State Central Committee and Lake County GOP Chairman and a lawyer, and they want him to be the chair. But the governor and like members of the congressional delegation, Rodney Davis included, put out a letter, let's keep things going the way they are, Tim Schneider's doing fine. And then you get Jeannie Ives saying the party is, we have more than 35 candidates for the legislature who are Democrats who are unopposed. Somehow a Nazi sympathizer snuck in a very Democratic district, but as a congressional candidate in the Chicago area, it's an embarrassment for the Republican Party. We need new leadership. And so there are some people saying, it hurts Governor Rauner's reelection chances if the party is split like this, and other people say, who cares who's in the party? This is a little squabble and it'll be over. Where's this one going?
Well, I definitely think that Tim Schneider will remain. Yes, we had Jeannie Ives' basically insurgency, and it came to a surprise, for the governor for sure, and lots of just everyone. But there's a difference between voters and the party apparatus. And so I do think, the Illinois GOP is one of the few places the governor still has a lot of influence and control. Even if people are mad at him, they still know that he is their best bet to have the Illinois that they envision. And so, Tim Schneider is not going anywhere, in my opinion.
I've heard it might be close. And there's also one member of the State Central Committee who was challenging his election, and so there might be some legal action in that. And if that were to happen, then the balance might change. But we'll see what happens. Dave, does the structure of the Republican Party matter that much versus the tens of millions of dollars that will be spent on advertising for Rauner versus Pritzker?
Over the long haul, maybe, but I think we saw that the Republican Party in Illinois was weak enough that the governor could come in, well, before he was governor, and put a lot of money in it and be the chief funder of it. And so now it's being propped up almost solely by him. So I think in a way the answer is both yes and no.
Okay. There's something is going on. The gun issue has been big around, to switch gears again, big around the country. And recently, some downstate counties, I will name them Monroe, Effingham, Saline, Iroquois, and Jefferson, at least, have had their county boards take action to say they are gun sanctuary areas, gun sanctuary counties, and they're kind of going with, the liberals want to make sanctuary cities and states for immigrants. We want to say that we won't enforce certain gun laws in our county. This could become a problem. A Christian county, it went through this last week, a committee, and it might pass their full county board. This could raise some problems and some questions for how the state enforces gun laws if the legislature passes any new ones, even bump stocks. So it's just kind of an interesting cultural shift, because you can tell those counties are not Chicago, which traditionally was a very gun control area, even though concealed carry is now the law of the land, but Chicago is about the last place to go.
I mean, it's a bold statement for them to do and name it such, a sanctuary county for gun owners. And, you could definitely see some legal action if these things do, in fact, pass the full county boards. It's cheeky. It's, an interesting election year topic, and like the gun issue is just not going away. I feel like for years people thought that Illinois was kind of immune from the gun issue, but not so anymore.
Yeah, well, we're very regionally split. I think in downstate it's a big deal, and of course our governor, whose main house is in Winnetka, but he's also a big hunter and motorcyclist, and so he is going to not be eager to do a lot of gun control. Dave, you got to meet the chaplain of the Loyola basketball team. She and the team were honored, and she gave the prayer to open the House and the Senate. How'd that go?
It was a fun day. It was a maroon and gold day, and she ended the prayer in both chambers by saying amen and go Ramblers.
Yeah, and how about, it seems like a lot of that was a bipartisan love, and probably an upstate and a downstate love for Loyola, whose basketball made the Final Four and surprised everybody in the NCAA tournament this year. So it's always nice, I guess, to see legislators of both parties happy about the same thing.
The only good team in the state, and for a while, Sister Jean was about the most talked about person in the country.
And she, I think, is 98 now, right? Anyway.
That's correct.
Well,
she came right here to Springfield.
It's a good time. Hannah Meisel, Dave Dahl, thanks for the conversation. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.